Support comes from the St. Louis Public Library Foundation. During these challenging times, free access to digital resources is a necessity. You can help our community stay connected. Support your St. Louis Public Library at SLPL.org.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. The debate over data centers is happening in towns large and small. In Festus, less than an hour's drive from St. Louis, that debate has drawn national attention and a rebuke from voters. That was the sound of hundreds of Festus residents during a March 30th City Council meeting that was filled with the sound of their disapproval. In spite of that, the meeting ended with the council voting 6-2 to approve a $6 billion, 300-acre hyperscale data center. 8 days later, many of those residents took their opposition to the voting booth and voted to replace every single incumbent. As far as an electorate's message, you couldn't get any clearer. This story in Festus is still unfolding. It raises familiar questions about whether these massive projects can survive despite criticism from the communities around them. Later in our show, we'll talk about the latest updates about a data center project proposed for St. Louis's Armory, which got final approval this Tuesday from the city's Board of Public Service. For now, let's return to what's happening in Festus, where opponents of the data center are turning to the courts to try to stop the project from moving forward. Erica Carter lives only a few minutes' drive away from the proposed site of the data center. She spoke yesterday with our producer, Danny Wysentowski. She described how, in November, she first learned about the plan. She said that it was her experience at a town meeting and hearing from the project's developer that convinced her to oppose it.
One of the town people kind of led the meeting and explained what a data center was. He said, we're going to need people speaking to the media and people going to town meetings and people organizing groups and, running petitions and organizing talks and all these things. And I thought, oh, gross, this is not for me. I don't want any part of any of this. Then Chris McKee from Clayco got up and spoke, and I became very angry. I felt like I had a bad feeling in the bottom of my stomach, like this man is not telling the truth about the things that he's trying to sell us on. So we came home and I researched some things and I'm like, ooh, this is not good. At that point, I thought the word data center, I wasn't really thinking of the words hyperscale. Like I said before any of this, I was not a politically involved person. I had never spoken publicly. So when there's an announcement for a public meeting or those little ads in the back of the newspaper, I'm the kind of person that's like, whatever, that's not for me. We went to the meeting and I was just outraged at how there was such a lack of transparency and how it felt like the people there weren't being heard. It felt like there was a level of sneakiness I had never seen before. They went ahead and voted on the rezoning and everything just felt so fast. And I think one of the residents spoke at one of the meetings about, there's a parade coming to town and the city council tabled the parade because they weren't sure of how it would affect the traffic. This is a 1-hour parade, and they wanted to do their due diligence to see how this parade was going to affect the traffic flow. But this project, this $6 billion project that they're bringing in, they're just, lightning speed ahead, step on the gas pedal with all your weight. We're going to do this right now. And there's no studies, there's no due diligence at all. We're just doing this whether you like it or not. And that's how the whole project has felt. When we go and we speak at these meetings, no one looks like the council people were not looking us in the eye. They stare down in their lap. A couple of them fall asleep. They get up and take long bathroom breaks. Some of them don't even attend. And it's a total lack of respect for the residents here in Festus. And it's been like that from day one. It's so disheartening.
Erica, part of the reason that we are talking about this issue on our show is that, in a period of just a week between this meeting on March 30th and then elections on, a week later, again in early April, we're talking about voters completely oust every incumbent council member who had just voted for this $6 billion plan for this data center. Take us into this time period and these moments as a local. What did this feel like playing out for you?
I don't think there was shock here. I mean, going to all the meetings here, when you were in the room, it just felt so heavy when they would vote for these things. Or when you go to just a regular town city council meeting and everyone's speaking and the only people that are for it do not live here, and they come in from out of town and talk about all the jobs this is going to bring. And they don't have to live here. They don't have to stay here for the consequences. And then they leave. So everybody here, I mean, the general consensus is we don't want this. So it wasn't a surprise. We had more than double turnout for our municipal election. It was record-breaking turnout. And the numbers were very clear. The incumbents had minimal votes. The new guys just blew them out of the water. And when they were speaking, they had community engagement. They met at small businesses on Wednesday to answer questions of the residents here in town. That's a huge point. I mean, all of the existing council members dodged questions. Their email bounced back, and anytime you tried to email them, their calls, when you call City Hall, would go straight to voicemail. No calls would get returned. It was that kind of avoidance. So, I mean, they made their bed and they had to lay in it. That's how I feel.
Erica, you are, a citizen like others who are opposed to data centers. This process is also unfolding in ways in St. Louis and in other places. Do you have any advice or reflections on what you've gone through and are watching develop right now? Any advice you would share with others who are asking some of these same questions? What would you tell people?
So last summer, my oldest son went away to basic training for the Army, and I thought, this is the hardest thing in my whole life that I've ever been through. He came home in October, and I'm like, okay, finally, my life is back to normal. And I feel like November said, hold my beer, because that's when all this stuff started. And my life has been pure hell since November. I love my home. My husband has remodeled my home. I have a happy family. I have healthy kids. I love the town I live in. We've lived here 11 years, and we've had our house appraised right when we found out, all this was happening. And the real estate agent came here, and I told him what was happening, and he said, what's a data center? And I said, perfect. You don't know what it is. Tell me what my home is worth. So he told me, and the value of our home had doubled in the 11 years that we bought it. And we've replaced everything that you can touch, from the roof to the soffit to the fascia to the windows, everything. It's beautiful. We love it here. We have beautiful woods behind our house. And we're a working class family. So half of our net worth is in our home. And for somebody to say, this is stupid, I don't care, why don't you move? We can't move now. My house is going to be, 630 to 1,000 feet away. My property line is from this proposed hyperscale data center, and no one is going to want to buy my home. So I feel like I've thrown away decades of my life working for nothing. It's been awful. Like I've gone to meetings, I've done talks, I've done speeches, I've organized things, we've ran petitions, and I hope it's for good. I hope things can change. We've put in a lot of work to get those 4 people elected, and I hope that they can undo the bad decisions that have been made, but I wouldn't wish this on anybody. And if somehow I do end up having to leave, and I move somewhere else, I hope we don't have to go through this again, because it just seems like it's everywhere. It's a nightmare.
That was Festus resident Erica Carter speaking about her opposition to the data center project that's drawn national attention to her town. Last month, every incumbent city council member in Festus who had helped approve the data center lost their bids for re-election. Those results sent a message. The national news site Politico described it as, quote, the latest example of growing public backlash against cities agreeing to host hyperscale data centers over the objections of residents. Those residents are actively working to block the project. Days after the election, a data center opposition group of Festus residents called Wake Up Jeffco filed a lawsuit. It is asking the court to reverse some key decisions made by the previous city council. The legal filing includes multiple screenshots of text messages. They appear to show unnamed city council members talking about the project. Steve Jeffrey is the attorney representing the group. Here's what he told producer Danny Wysentowski yesterday.
The lack of transparency in this entire process. And in the lawsuit, we believe, shows exactly why this lack of transparency occurred. The email traffic, the text message traffic between city officials and people with CRG, it just shows that this process started back in early August of 2025. These negotiations between the developer and city officials continued, in small groups of city council members meeting with CRG, and this continued through August, September, October, and all the way almost through the end of November, when, and I believe as referred to by the former city administrator, the cat was let out of the bag when they had to have a public meeting when they wanted to do their first changes to the zoning code.
And CRG, that is, of course, CRG Acquisition, that's the data center developer. They obviously come up a great deal in this lawsuit in their discussions. In summary, what was the extent of their discussions and shaping of this official policy? Where was that line crossed?
So far, the emails and text messages that are currently available, which led up to the filing of the lawsuit, and we again, as part of in the context of the lawsuit, we have submitted discovery requests seeking to capture every email, every text message back and forth between the developer and the city. So that's still in process, and hopefully we'll gather a lot of additional information. But I think if you go back to the earlier emails between the developer and the city, there's an exchange. Well, this isn't going to be made public, is it? And the city official says, no, although we're agreeing to it now, I can sit on this for a couple of months and it won't become public until end of November. It just shows a pattern and practice of the lack of transparency, how the developer and the city work together basically to keep the public and all their constituents completely in the dark about this.
I want to ask you about one of these text message exchanges that you include in the lawsuit that really stood out to me. It's from September 2025, and these are unidentified city officials from Festus. They are talking about CRG, the data center developer, and they are just jubilant about the numbers that are coming out. They discuss something close to $750,000 in tax revenue, it sounds like. The phrase, it's mind-blowing, is thrown around. And there's this moment where one of the officials say that hopefully they, CRG, can handle the NIMBYs, and using an acronym for not in my backyard. Did CRG, the developer, have any involvement in dealing with the opposition from the public who were upset about this plan once it came out? Is there any coordination happening to suppress people's opinions to some degree?
We believe just the secrecy, the behind closed door negotiations, the lack of transparency. I use the phrase pattern and practice. I think it clearly demonstrates that the developer and the city officials wanted to negotiate this project, keep the public in the dark until the absolute last possible moment when it was too late for the public to mount any potential opposition, and so the whole thing just gets ramrodded through.
Yeah. And you are also representing a different group that is filing a lawsuit in Montgomery County involving 2 other data center projects there, with remarkably similar situations and allegations of lack of transparency, of city officials working with these developers. What stands out to you about the similarities here? Are you seeing a larger pattern in practice that these different community groups are going through?
Sure. Again, for the record, I represent not only the group in Festus, but a group in Pacific, Missouri, working with another group in Franklin County, Missouri, a group in Warren County, Missouri, as well as the group in Montgomery County, Missouri. So, and yesterday I met with a group of folks from Ferguson, Missouri, concerned about the proposed project going in at the former Emerson corporate complex up there. And I think what stands out to me, it's based on my experience and information I've gathered in working with these various things, there is a common pattern that these developers follow. Number one, they approach the local government officials saying, hey, have we got a deal for you? It's going to make your community millions and millions of dollars. But for us to tell you about it, you have to sign non-disclosure agreements. So that's step one. So that's when the secrecy really starts. And so as this common pattern progresses, all behind closed doors, all in the dark, multiple violations of the Missouri Sunshine Law by having these meetings with less than a quorum of city officials for the specific purpose of keeping things secret. The developer, if proposes, changes to the city's zoning code to specifically accommodate their particular project, and if there's any other revisions need to be made either to zoning codes, the terminology used in zoning classifications, that's all supplied by the developer. And the city officials, who are only seeing dollar signs, roll over and basically do whatever the developer asks them to. And then at the 11th hour, it all becomes public. The public gets very upset. They get very angry. And as demonstrated a couple of weeks ago in Festus, angry people make angry voters. And angry voters extract their vengeance at the polling booth.
Now, let me ask you that, because that election has really drawn a great deal of attention, a backlash to these officials. Your lawsuit is still continuing. Does a new composition of this city council, which may take a different kind of stance towards some of these policy questions, does that change where this lawsuit is moving? It is making a number of demands involving zoning decisions and things like that. Does this complicate where this litigation goes?
Well, there's really 2 parallel railroad tracks. One of the 3 goals of the lawsuit is to invalidate the city's zoning decisions. Another goal of the litigation is to invalidate the infrastructure development agreement that the prior city council entered into with the developer. So then you have this brand new railroad track just now leaving the station with these 4 new council members with their hands on the throttle. So where that train ends up going, no one knows yet, but possibly, again, if a political resolution of this is achieved such that the data center project is killed, then the litigation probably is rendered moot.
That was attorney Steve Jeffrey. He's representing Festus residents and the group Wake Up Jeffco, which is suing the city of Festus and trying to stop a hyperscale data center project in their town. We need to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk more about the efforts to stop a data center in Festus, and we'll also get an update on what happened with a different data center proposal in the St. Louis region. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
Support comes from Gemma, architects, planners, and designers seeking to bring joy to their clients and communities. Details at gemastl.com.
Welcome back. We're talking today about data centers. One project in Festus has attracted national attention after a major election shakeup. Residents who opposed a $6 billion proposal voted out every incumbent city council member who approved it. A resident group is also suing to stop the project before it breaks ground. To talk with us about how Festus has arrived at the current situation, I'm joined by STLPR reporters Katie Grawitch and Kavahn Mansouri. Thank you both for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Good to be here.
So we heard CRG mentioned several times in comments made by Festus resident Erica Carter and resident group attorney Steve Jeffrey before the break. Kavahn, help us to understand a bit about this developer, CRG. Who are they and why are they interested in Festus?
Yeah, CRG is basically the data center developing arm of Clayco, which is a well-known area developer. And basically, they have proposed a lot of data centers in the area. You may recall earlier last year in St. Charles, there was a similar possibly hyperscale data center that had a lot of controversy surrounding it. Well, CRG Clayco was the developer behind that project. They had proposed to build there. That didn't work out. It's not clear if this is the exact same project. That one was known as Cumulus, I believe, and this is sort of kind of, some people kind of say maybe like, well, it didn't work out in St. Charles, let's take it to Festus. And it could be that it was a more friendlier government. There was a lot of pushback from the public in St. Charles, and local officials would respond to that. They put a year moratorium on data center proposals in St. Charles. But in Festus, as there was pushback, but it seemed like the city council there was a little less interested in that pushback, at least from up until recently, when there was, as we heard, many of them lost their seats. But yes, CRG Clayco, developing arm of Clayco for data centers specifically.
Mm-hmm. Katie, is there anything more that you can tell us about CRG, and in particular what its CEO, Bob Clark, who's also the founder of Clayco, was saying about why this data center should go into Festus?
Yeah, absolutely. Bob Clark was speaking last week about Festus being ripe for data center development, and spoke of a lot of the benefits to residents, that this would be something that's really beneficial in terms of tax benefits for Festus residents who may need it more since it's a smaller community.
Mm-hmm. And Kavahn, a citizen group claimed, this is what Clark has said, that a citizen group claimed various things in the lawsuit, we heard about that earlier, the lawsuit that are related to transparency and the Sunshine Law. I can tell you from my perspective, Clayco under no circumstance violated any laws or any rules, that we acted appropriately through the entire process. What do you make of that statement, Kavahn?
Maybe true. I think the big thing with these data centers that are coming into these towns that in a lot of ways maybe not prepared to handle development of this size. So this developer comes in, they start having conversations, and I have to think that I mean, I don't know about how this lawsuit will go, but I have to think that a group like Clayco or most data center developers, they have a legal team. The city has a legal team, and they are probably gonna have discussions about what is and is legal. That's not to say that like laws weren't broken. I can't say that for sure. But the problem is that even within legality when it comes to these data centers, there are a ton of transparency issues. We saw it in St. Charles. We saw it, NDAs are not illegal, but there is something I think a lot of citizens in all these cities, and I feel like I've covered them in St. Louis, in St. Charles, in Festus. I've talked to some people in Montgomery City. The thing that they repeat is that these are the people we voted in the office. Like they are supposed to be representing us, and there are things they can't talk to us about. They are legally bound from talking. So it's kind of like this transparency issue made set in stone by a legal precedent, right? Of like, you have this NDA that you must sign if you want to learn anything about this data center. So the transparency, the trust is kind of like, broken right there, because these residents, they feel like you can't talk to us, but we voted you in. You're in the people's house, whatever you want to say, and you're not telling us what we want to know about these projects.
And speaking of voting in, voting out, there was also another development, Katie. Another Festus City Council member has stepped down in the wake of the backlash against the data center. Why did that happen?
Yeah, there's actually a lot that we don't know about why that happened right now. When we asked Mayor Sam Richards about this, he said that she left for personal reasons. We don't have comment from Templeton on this right now. What we do know is that she expressed her interest in leaving before the last city council meeting, before a vote for mayor pro tem, and eventually stayed on so that mayor pro tem vote could go through in favor of a pro data center candidate. And then left. She's the 5th council member to leave amid data center backlash. And so I think this is a testament to the pushback that's maybe getting through to these council members a little bit more. And Templeton had also previously voted against a milestone toward this new data center project. So
she was one of the surprise votes at the city council member meeting at the Festus High School that turned her vote at the last minute. There was kind of like almost a gasp. But it's kind of hard to these city council members who are it was personal in that gym. People were throwing lots of insults and people were really upset and
What was it like? I mean, were there people there who are actually supporters of that Festus project?
Yeah, so it was really interesting. This happened. I've covered a lot of these hearings now, and they people are really upset, so they go on and on. But one thing I noticed at the Festus High School gym, there was a small contingent sitting on the very right side of the bleachers across from the media, and there, of course, there was the Clayco there as well, Clayco CRG. But they had probably about 24 signs that say "Support the data center," something along those lines. But there was like 4 or 5 people there, and they were surrounded by people who were kind of heckling them. One guy I took note, like got up and left halfway through and just didn't return. So there is, and typically what those, from my experience covering a lot of these, sometimes there'll be 1 or 2 like residents who are saying, I think our school districts need to be better. That has been the case in St. Louis. Mm-hmm. That's been people have shown up because they want more money for STLPR, this or that. But it's typically union representatives, which do bring in this different perspective, right? Like there is this perception from, and perhaps it's something maybe we should be looking into, is that union workers or workers in general are going to places where data centers are being built. I apologize, and they're not staying in St. Louis. And I think what a lot of the union members are saying, like, these are a lot of jobs. The pushback on that, of course, is these are temporary jobs, but that's a whole sort of different tree branch to go down.
Katie, Festus is not a big city. It has a population of less than 15,000 residents. But what is it that struck you about sort of the larger interest in this case and in national coverage?
Yeah, absolutely. As I think some of Kavahn's reporting has touched on previously, a lot of data center developers are eyeing places in the South, places in the rural South for data center development. And so this case could very well be a bellwether case for what it's going to be like to bring these new hyperscale AI data centers into smaller communities. And I think this pushback is a really dramatic case that shows how this may play out in a lot of other smaller towns.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's also major news this week regarding a St. Louis data center. On Tuesday, a $3 billion data center project planned near the site of the Armory in Midtown received a final okay from city officials. Now, Kavahn, you noted that this comes just weeks after Mayor Kara Spencer requested that the vote be delayed. So what do we know about what is happening now?
Yeah, so this vote has been a long time coming. Obviously, the Armory data centers, it's like Mach 2, the second version. The first one was just going to be at the Armory. There'd be a big data center. That got a lot of pushback. They changed it, so it's going to be like a $3 billion project with a data center in it, like sort of an office. They're calling it an innovation area. But the problem is, and the reason the mayor gave for asking to push back that vote is that the city is currently mulling over totally new zoning rules for data centers. People who are really read in might know that the city has a super antiquated zoning system. They're going through a process called the ZOOP right now to upgrade the zoning upgrade. And basically what all that means is that the city does not have rules in place to handle a data center. So right now, the Planning and Urban Design Agency, they've put forth some rules to say this is what a data center should be. There was a hearing. There was a lot of pushback during that hearing. Some people saying no data centers at all. But basically, they said, we're going to take this back to the drawing board. We're going to work on it a little bit, and we're going to get back to you guys. We'll have another meeting. There'll be a vote eventually, but we want a lot of public pushback or public feedback on these rules. So Mayor Kara Spencer says, well, let's push back the Armory vote. We're looking at these zoning rules. Let's do our due diligence. But then sort of in this maelstrom of a day, we get wind that hey, they're going to vote on this. This is happening. It's got the mayor's blessing. There'll probably be a press release coming out the minute they vote on it. And it turned in this thing where there's this big scramble, something's happening. We think the Armory is going to get this final approval, which it might still have some hurdles that if people want to appeal. But basically all to say that, there was some sort of agreement struck in the background, right? There was going to be added on to this where these rough draft rules of the zoning, the zoning rules that are possibly going to be put into place, patched onto the Armory project, as well as a community benefit agreement that sees the many developers that are attached to this process putting, I think it's $16 million towards, I think it's the Brickline Greenway and a few other things. And it's sort of this chaotic day of this is going through, it's happening. And there's people showing up in this Board of Public Service meeting where no one ever goes. It's not a place where there's a lot of public pushback. But anyway, all to say, it was this big sort of maelstrom-like day of news happening where they're sort of patching in rules that haven't been passed yet onto a project that they want to move forward.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything, Katie, that you see in this St. Louis project that recalls what has been happening in Festus?
I think the big thing that stands out to me is what a lot of residents in Festus are perceiving as a speedy or aggressive push to development, which I think reflects a lot of what Kavahn just said about sort of the hastiness of how this project seemed from the outside. I think a lot of residents, particularly in Festus, want to feel like they're included in the decision-making process, that they're being heard. I don't know of a community benefit agreement yet for the Festus data center, so I think keeping an eye on ways to include the public in those conversations is something that maybe the Festus developers can learn from.
Sort of that Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry. That vote that they took was kind of locking in a overall community benefit agreement in Festus. It was more here are the taxes we're going to get, here are the requirements of the actual data center.
Mm-hmm. In our last 30 seconds or so, Kavahn, what are the next steps for this St. Louis project?
Yeah, so obviously people can go to appeal. It costs some money. It can even go to the courts, as we saw. But basically, it's a matter of things getting started. I think at this point, there's still a lot of really aggrieved people out there. I think this is going to be a big moment for the mayor's first 100 days, first 150 days. No, I'm sorry, first year. But yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of more pushback. We saw the protests at the State of the City. I think we're going to see more of those. People are very upset, and I think we'll be probably looking out for more. The mayor made it sound like the city is open for business for data centers.
Yeah, and very quickly, what is the thing that you're going to be watching for, Katie?
Yeah, next week at the city council meeting, I'm going to be watching for potentially filling Templeton's seat. Mayor Sam Richards gets to pick a candidate. That'll go for vote for the city council. I'm also looking toward the treasurer seat because the city administrators let us know that the treasurer's seat was mistakenly left off the ballot in this municipal
Festus.
Festus election. So we'll be looking at potentially re-upping the current treasurer's tenure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be keeping an eye on sort of the whole thing. I mean, I data centers are taking Missouri, St. Louis, and the country by storm. There's too many stories for us to keep up with, but there's so many out there, and transparency is a key issue there. So I think that's what I'll be looking into.
Mm-hmm. Kavahn Mansouri and Katie Grawitch, thank you so much for talking with us about your reporting for STLPR about data centers in the St. Louis region.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
This episode was produced by Danny Wissentowski.
Audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations, and leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thank you.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
Hi, I'm Laura Hamden, and my colleague Jessica Rogan and I are your daily hosts of the Gateway newsletter. We meet with the editors in the STLPR newsroom every weekday to bring you the top local stories of the day in a quick and easy 6-minute read by 6 a.m. In an age of overwhelm, it's a refreshing, thoughtful take on the news day, if we do say so ourselves. Fine-tune your daily news habit with the Gateway newsletter. Subscribe at stlpr.org/gateway.